ride.
Want a lift?
Hey! Okay, dude, let's see what that jalopy can do!
What's a jalopy?
First off the line.
Yeah, I'm sure they're feeling pretty silly right now.
Hey guys, Zack here, and welcome back to Megas. So today's episode we're going to be reviewing is Fat and the Furious, and this one's kind of fun in that Coop just kind of enters Megas in a car show, which makes perfect sense from a logical standpoint. I mean, technically speaking, even though it's technically a giant robot from the future that he found, technically speaking, it is technically a car because it has a car for a head and technically fits in the ultra modified category for car shows. It's weird. It's as weird as it sounds, but it makes perfect sense when you consider the fact that Megas is literally just a modified car with a giant robot on the bottom of it. Literally, that's what that's what Megas is, and it kind of works. I do kind of like the idea for that. But in case the episode opens up with Coop fighting what we apparently find what was later eventually revealed to be a giant cheese monster, and of course the two of them are battling, or the three of them are trying to battle it when with Kiva asking how exactly it is that this actually came to happen, and what we find out is that Coop and Jamie were using Megas as a sunroof, as kind of like a sun deck. They had there's this little attachment on Megas' chest that just sticks out and it looks like a deck, and then they can use one of the little opening flaps for Megas to transform it into a sun deck with a retractable awning, basically. It kind of works. It's kind of fun, but and Coop and Jamie are just lounging in lounge chairs on Megas' chest and on Megas' little chest deck that it has, and it's at this point where Jamie decides to ask Coop what would happen if they were to pour some soft cheese into what the script refers to as an ionized deuteronium actuator, which is a bunch of gobbledygook nonsense, but Coop and of course it's not supposed to like really mean anything, but Coop ultimately decides that that could be a really fun experiment, and they actually squeeze some cheese into the actuator, which kind of creates the giant cheese monster, and it just kind of bursts out of Megas and starts rampaging, and that's where and of course Coop and Jamie deny of course because this is a flashback. Coop and Jamie deny the fact that this was actually a thing that happened, and of course Jamie also decides to actually throw Coop under the bus, claiming that it was his fault, with Coop just kind of yelling at him, but Kiva decides she doesn't really want to know the answer, tells him to just stop it, and Coop does. He pulls it into a bear hug with Megas and just causes cheese to just explode everywhere, and of course this winds up being a rather humorous effect where there's just cheese everywhere, and Megas is now covered in it, and of course Coop points out that there was no harm, no foul, and then pulls up some loose change and drops it out of Megas' window into a charity car wash, which actually winds up scaring the kids running it, and for good reason. I don't want to. I mean, this is a very a very obvious thing, but you shouldn't drop nickels, dimes, or whatever the hell you have out of a very tall place, because eventually, if those things hit terminal velocity, they could very well kill someone. I am not kidding. Some people have actually tested this, and it is, in case in point, it is very possible for that to actually happen, and there is indeed scientific evidence to prove that doing that is an actual bad idea. So don't do what Coop did and drop coins out of a very high place. But because it's not high enough to reach terminal velocity, it winds up being fine, and Coop merely remarks that he needs to clean out all the cheese and look its best for the car show, and of course points out that nothing bad has actually gone wrong. But as we find out, the central CPU unit that is in charge of running Megas and all of its systems, some cheese actually winds up getting on it without Coop's knowledge. So he winds up going to the car show without realizing that the CPU is covered in cheese. So so in any case, he does wind up arriving at the car show, where again, where of course, as I mentioned, they don't really, the car show doesn't really have any sort of category for a giant robot, and so Coop winds up entering it into the ultra modified category, which they openly accept, and of course they then proceed to hand Coop his entry ticket and proceed to leave to go judge other cars, with Kiva being very confused, pointing out that she didn't realize that they actually do this kind of thing with cars, and that you can actually win an award for this. But Coop does point out that it's a very big thing in 2004, and still very much a big thing today. Everybody goes to car shows. I've been to a couple, but Coop then proceeds to ask her what they do instead in the future, and Kiva points out the very obvious fact that in the future they're fighting for their lives and they don't really have time for car shows, which Jamie mocks her for, pointing out that she really likes milking that point, and of course he has a very, very good point. Eventually they are going to have to defeat the Glorft, and they don't really do that because again the show got canceled, but she does have a very good point. They don't really have time for any of the leisurely activities we take for granted in the future because of course they're constantly fighting against the Glorft, their mortal enemies. While Jamie does mock her, she does have a very good point. They don't have time for a lot of leisurely stuff, and that kind of makes me sad a little bit. But it's very much a good thing she got sent back to the past, because of course that means she's now able to experience all the things that she wasn't able to experience in the future because of how bleak the future is. And honestly, that is kind of her character arc throughout the series. She does kind of focus on the mission a lot, but through Coop's influence, she does kind of learn about all the different things that she missed out on, and I do kind of like that as her character. But in case after that, Coop then brings the giant robot inside, and of course proceeds to park Megas inside the giant awning, which we find out is actually sponsored by Pop TV, which does wind up resulting in another Pop TV shot, which in another MTV joke. So that does eventually happen, but in case Coop then looks around, pointing out that the competition seems very fierce this year, and while Jamie reassures him, pointing out that he has an actual giant robot and nobody can touch him in the category this year, he does point out that there are indeed a couple of very fierce competitors this year, and does point to all of the different things that are going around, and also in the midst of this, he also starts talking up engines with several of the people who come by and actually ask him about what kind of engines Megas has, and if it's hard to control, and of course Coop answers the very obvious thing about how it has so many motors and engines that he doesn't really understand what some of them do. And also points out that it's not, and also there's a very humorous thing where he points out that it isn't particularly hard as long as you have general knowledge of how to drive automobiles and also know how to work a D-pad. But of course, there's also a very humorous flashback where initially when he first had Megas, he didn't fully understand how to control it right away and was still working it all out. So he does kind of lie through his teeth a little bit, but he does mostly have a control over Megas. There are the couple occasional times where he does destroy something, but that's more so after the fact, and more so because he's screwing around more than he's actually trying to save the world. That's it is a recurring part of his character where he'll destroy something at the very end of the episode, but he does for the most part have enough control over Megas to actually generally control it and have a good idea of what he's doing. But in case Jamie Coop then goes back to admiring all the different cars, and does point out that there are that once again he's very worried about all the different things that come by, including a car with a mint green paint job and chainmail steering wheel and sure enough, right on cue, that exact same car pulls up, and a man named Tiny gets out, who humorously is misnamed because he's a lot bigger than most of the main cast, but he does go up to greet Coop, revealing that they are actually old rivals and friends, and that he knows Coop from way back, and that they've actually been attending car shows forever and have been friendly rivals. And of course Coop is very just happy to see Tiny, and does point out that he feels like it might finally be his year, even though Tiny doubts it, even though he sees the very obvious giant robot, and does point out that a fancy paint job and looks on everything, and does wonder how the robot actually handles. And sure enough, they then proceed to get into a bit of a competition, into a bit of a car show competition where the two of them try to outcompete each other. And of course, Coop handles basically everything with little to no hassle because obviously Megas is a giant robot and is able to handle a lot of the car show things no problem. And although Tiny does give him a run for his money because obviously Tiny's car is thoroughly customized and is also able to handle each of the competitions with flying colors. And I think they tie in every category. The only thing that Tiny actually winds up winning is at the very end when they go for the truck pull and Coop whiffs it mainly because Megas is too strong and he winds up ripping the front of the car off. He winds up ripping the front of the truck off and it winds up exploding. So yeah, Coop doesn't win that. But in case when they get to the transformation category, which once again Coop wins. It's at this point where Megas actually starts malfunctioning because obviously there's cheese in its CPU unit, and of course Megas then proceeds to start stumbling around uncontrollably, and when Coop and Jamie quickly realize that something is clearly wrong, and Kiva immediately calls up Coop and asks him what the hell it is he's doing, and he does proceed to point out that of course Coop doesn't really have any control over what's going on with Megas. He points out that it's actually malfunctioning and he can't fully control it and has no idea what's going on. And sure enough, miraculously, he doesn't wind up smashing any of the cars in the process. But Kiva quickly realized that if Megas is going after control, it's only a matter of time before he hurts someone, and she starts pulling civilians to safety, and to a lesser extent Jamie, who is kind of cowering for his own safety behind a car, and she does call him out on that. But eventually Kiva realizes that if Megas isn't responding to any of Coop's inputs on the dashboard, that they're of course going to need to figure out they're of course going to need to actually remove the CPU unit so that which should shut down all the systems. And Coop does it reluctantly, pointing out that he doesn't really want to, but realizes that if he needs to shut down Megas and keep it from destroying things, that's exactly what he'll happily do. And sure enough, he punches through the main monitor on Megas's dashboard, uttering a sorry to Megas as he does so, and then proceeds to rip out the CPU unit, which is this giant cylinder thing. And this, of course, causes Megas to shut down, but in the process, it had actually managed to wander its way outside and almost steps on Goat, who is trying to flirt with a woman. He's not particularly succeeding, mainly because Megas chases her off. And of course, I brought this up, but he does show up. I didn't really bring this up, but he does show up in a custom-made car that the episode makes a very obvious point isn't the best looking, and for good reason. Goat just kind of, it's just kind of a hodgepodge of different automobile parts, and it's just kind of barely held together. It's very clear that Goat just assembled the car together with whatever he had lying around, which, since he owns a junkyard, is saying something. So his of course his automobile is just this big custom thing, and Goat does kind of point out that he was indeed hitting it off with a chick who he chalks up to wasn't interested because his breath, as he puts it, smells like sour cream and onion, and wonders who doesn't like that, even though sour cream and onion isn't the most satisfying, isn't the best flavor for your breath to smell like. Actually, halitosis tests. Yeah, if your breath smells bad, probably some people are probably going to run away from you. I'm just gonna point that out. And truth be told, if Megas hadn't gone haywire, his breath probably would have been enough to chase her away. I'm gonna be perfectly honest. But in case with that, Kiva then proceeds to take the CPU unit, and as she puts it, it should work fine now that she's de-cheesed it, and he does point, and Coop does point out no harm, no foul, pointing out that of course now that she's actually de-cheesed it, he's very happy, although he admits that he maybe could have done that if he had a sport candy, but which she just kind of shoots him a look, and because obviously that's a very dumb thing to say, but of course, and it's at this point where Goat actually starts flirting with Kiva and calls her Red, which she becomes visibly annoyed by, and does point out that her name is Kiva, and it's at this point where they realize that now that they have the CPU degunked, it's just a matter of putting it back in the machine. But it's at this point where the Glorft, who I should mention, I have mentioned this, they are the main antagonists, and they are mentioned in every episode, but they don't show up all the time. It's at this point where the Glorft decide to actually make their move, because according to Glorft, now it's without its CPU unit, and Megas isn't actually able to move around without it, and does point out that now it's malfunctioning and defenseless, they now have the perfect opportunity to go in and reclaim it and possibly destroy it, so that the as he puts it, the Earthers aren't able to use it, and of course, it's at this point where many, I've already pictured them, but many of the Glorft robots just kind of show up and are well prepared to take the robot, which take the robot. But it's at this point where Gorath and his fellow Glorft are quickly figure out that Megas doesn't have the CPU unit in it, and quickly realizing that they're not going to be able to move the robot around without it. Point out that they need to find the CPU unit at all costs, and of course, Kiva quickly points out that they can't get the CPU unit, or it'll be taken, and Megas will be stolen. So she hands it off to Coop, and tells him not to keep the CPU unit away from the Glorft at all costs, pointing out that the Glorft aren't allowed, or can't have it, and then she proceeds to run off. At which point, Coop greets Goat and Jamie, pointing out that it seems like it's going to be just them guys to actually fend off the Glorft. But of course, Jamie runs at the first sign of danger, and Goat points out, hollers that Jamie did not leave Coop hanging, but ultimately runs off himself. And Coop just kind of points out that that's not cool to do. And sure enough, the Glorft eventually realized that Coop is the one who actually has the CPU unit, and proceed to chase after him with Coop trying to run as far away as possible from the Glorft, and points out that he's not having a very good time with it because he doesn't like running. But there's at one point where the Glorft tried to shoot him up, but it quickly becomes apparent where that Glorft doesn't want them shooting up Coop, even though that would rid him of one of his greatest enemies. But and the main reason that Glorft doesn't want the Glorft shooting him up is for the very basic reason that he's holding the CPU unit and he doesn't want it damaged. So they just decide to actually just destroy the environment around Coop rather than actually attacking him directly. So and of course, Coop does continue to run away from them through the parking lot at the car show. But when Kiva shows up in one of the cars and tells him to get in, and he does, he only gets about halfway into the window, but she does wind up driving off, and with Coop humorously sticking out halfway out the window, and at one point even offers to drive for her, but she does point out that if Coop can handle Megas, she can more than definitely handle a basic car. I mean, obviously it's been thoroughly cut. I mean, obviously the main reason Coop is able to control Megas is because it's been thoroughly customized, and she can't control it because she doesn't know video games as well as Coop does. But a car, yeah, she has that figured out, no problem. And sure enough, she then proceeds to drive off and eventually pulls Coop into the car with Coop remarking that he always wanted to do that, and he's referring to the fact that he always wanted to jump inside a window of a vehicle, but which she points at, and when she kind of gives him a bit of a confused look, pointing out that she always wanted to, pointing out that that's a very weird dream to have. He does point out that's a guy thing and she wouldn't understand. But in any case, they continue to drive down the roads through Jersey City to try and get as far away from the Glorft as possible. And eventually, they wind up passing Jamie on a scooter, and Coop decides to actually pass the CPU unit to Jamie, which of course makes him the target now. And Jamie points out that he probably shouldn't have gotten on the scooter, but then Goat shows up in his custom-made car and asks Jamie to pass it to him. And from this point onward, the episode just becomes a game of keep away, where the three guys just keep passing the CPU unit across one another, with the Glorft just being kind of confused as to who they're supposed to target, because obviously every 5 seconds the CPU unit is just being passed like a hot potato between the guys. So of course, and eventually Gorath just gets sick of it and decides that the best way to actually stop them is to destroy the road. And this does wind up working. This does actually wind up working. It winds up stopping Goat and Jamie in their tracks, and they're unable to actually get the CPU unit back to Coop. But they do manage to make one last pass, and Coop is able to get it back to Megas, and pointing out that they have one last chance to actually get back. they realize that now it's time to actually turn the tides. But Glorft quickly realizes where they're going and decides to actually destroy the bridge that they're on, so that they can't actually get a direct shot back to Megas. But despite that, Kiva winds up driving it off the road, and Coop and Kiva winds up landing harmlessly on Megas, and the car that they were in winds up landing on a Pop TV van, which winds up destroying it, because of course, every chance the show gets, it's going to make fun of MTV because of what they did. It's just a recurring bit. It's a recurring thing. But yeah, in any case, Coop is just so happy to have finally gotten back to his robot that he actually decides to gloat and does a touchdown with the CPU unit, which breaks it, and much to Kiva's chagrin. And Coop kind of just apologizes, pointing out that he got carried away. And yeah, he did. He just kind of just smashed the CPU unit. And meanwhile, Goat and Jamie just kind of stare slack-jawed in awe about how cool Kiva is, and Goat points out that she's quite the woman, but while Jamie points out that they're very much surrounded, and points out that without the CPU unit, that Megas is just going to sit there blind, and it's at this point where Goat comes up with an idea, pointing out that he has an idea to actually keep all of the robots off of Coop and Kiva's back while they prepare the CPU unit. Meanwhile, Kiva is currently sitting in the front seat with Coop, and quickly points out that she needs more time to actually repair the CPU unit, and they're not going to, and they're just, and for the time being, they're just sitting ducks. So Coop decides to actually pull out revealing that he actually has installed a manual mode in Megas on the off chance that I can't actually pilot remotely. And of course, what we find out is that the manual mode is actually a DDR dancing board. Basically, there's just basically it's designed after Dance Dance Revolution, and when Kiva asks Coop how he actually came up with the idea for it, pointing out that it's a very strange idea, he does point out that he actually got the idea by actually playing a game of DDR, while a couple of girls admittedly laugh at him, pointing out how fat he is, but Coop didn't really seem to care at the time, because Coop's very comfortable in his own skin. He's not particularly offended when somebody calls him fat, but yeah, of course, he then admits that that's where he actually just came up with the idea while he was doing that, and points out that ultimately it is the only way they're going to be able to fend off the robots until they can actually restore the CPU unit. And of course, Kiva points out the very obvious thing about how it'll only be able to mimic his movements, and they're not going to be able to actually use the weapons to actually fight the Glorft. And Coop does point out that they're not going to need them, and proceeds to actually set up the machine and get it going. And it's at this point where the machine actually starts running, and of course Coop starts beating all the Glorft with DDR moves. It's a very funny thing, but of course, there becomes the very obvious problem is that Coop is not the most athletic guy, and after a couple of moves, he eventually does start tiring himself out, and eventually does wear himself out and is unable to actually fight back against the Glorft after a point. And of course, this is this point where Glorft actually calls him the gloat, pointing out that he does admire how strange and unorthodox Coop's strategies are, but they're mostly strange. But does point out that now that he's actually on his last legs, it's more an opportunity for him then to take him out. And of course, the Glorft then proceed to actually circle around him into their own mechs. But then the cavalry arrives, and all of the car show attendees, led by Tiny, just kind of drive in with their vehicles and start distracting the Glorft long enough for Kiva to actually finish the CPU unit. And this winds up working, but a lot of their cars wind up getting destroyed. But in the process, Coop actually winds up collapsing, and Megas actually falls after him. And Tiny winds up using the various debris to actually drive up to Megas' head, and drops Jamie off because Jamie was actually riding in the back seat with him, and proceeds to get into the back seat, even remarking that Kiva is actually in his spot. But Kiva points out that she's not really concerned about that right now, and when Jamie kind of mocks her, pointing out that she shouldn't be working so hard on the CPU unit, pointing out that Coop can drive it manually, she also points out the very obvious fact that Coop is tired, and And points out that the CPU unit is the best bet because it can actually process 1,000,000,001 things according to her, and that's ultimately better than just Coop trying to dance revolution his way to victory. And Coop and Jamie eventually concedes and decides to sit in the back seat, but eventually she does wind up fixing the CPU unit while the other car attendees just do continue to distract the rest of the Glorft, who wind up smashing up the car show venue a little bit, as well as many of the cars, and obviously Coop's stomach starts churning and he starts getting really mad because obviously his friends worked hard on those cars. He's getting visibly annoyed about the fact that the Glorft are actually just smashing up all of his friends' cars and ruining all their hard work. And eventually Kiva does wind up fixing the machine, but does point out that she still needs to actually fix the final circuit because they don't connect. And then wonders what she can actually use for a bridge when Jamie points out that she needs to hurry up because obviously the Glorft are smashing everything up. And so this point where she quickly realizes that Jamie will serve as a perfect bridge and hands them both of the wires to hold. And this winds up working. This winds up fixing Megas somehow because, of course, using Jamie as a circuit works. I mean, the fact that he's holding 2 live wires is kind of bad and dangerous for him, but he winds up surviving this, which is kind of interesting. But even though Megas obviously has a lot more electrical power than your standard vehicle. So Jamie should be dead. I should mention he should be dead from this. But in case now that they have full power over the CPU again and are now able to actually get Megas back and running, Coop then decides to finally deliver his signature trash talk, where he chews out the Glorft for showing up. And Jamie gives moral support for this by backing Coop up, but Coop then proceeds to point out that they showed up, wrecked his friend's car show and all their rides, and also rather humorously admits that he had to run half a block because of them, which but in any case with the machine with Jamie just kind of looking at him rather confusedly, pointing out that obviously that's not the biggest thing to be worrying about, but in any case Coop then proceeds to turn on the nitro and then single-handedly proceeds to just destroy all the robots because obviously the machine is going way too fast for any of the Glorft to actually process. And eventually several of the Glorft actually wind up retreating, much to Glorft's chagrin, pointing out that he didn't order retreat. But his commander then points out that obviously they're taking heavy casualties, and they're not going to be able to actually fight back against Megas for much longer. But it's at this point where Glorft then proceeds to scold him, and also slaps him with his own arm because Megas actually winds up destroying the robots to the point where they don't really have arms anymore. But at which point Glorft then calls up Coop, pointing out that even though he's actually been doing handling so far, he's not going to back down from a challenge and is going to get Coop's Megas unit regardless of how many casualties they take. And Coop kind of stops him, pointing out that he says that all the time, and points out that he may be human Earth scum, but he ain't no chicken. And it's at this point where they actually wind up playing a game of chicken. So yeah, basically what just happens is that Glorft and Coop then proceed to fly their 2 robots into one another, and it's only because of Jamie that they wind up swarming out of the way at the last second because obviously he doesn't want to die, and also admits that he doesn't like riding in the back seat because for good reason, because he knows because of this. It hasn't really been outright stated, but it's been heavily implied that the back seat doesn't have any seat belts, and of course, on top of that, Megas goes very, very fast. So yeah, those combined result in the backseat being the worst place to actually sit when piloting Megas. So of course Jamie almost throws up and proceeds to tell Coop and proceeds to actually tell Coop to slow down and actually grabs the steering wheel away from him, which causes Coop to actually veer off and stop playing a game of chicken with Glorft. And Glorft gloats over his victory, but that victory winds up being short-lived because he winds up flying into an explosive, shrapnel, and a bunch of other things factory. I couldn't really read it because it goes by way too fast, but very funny that he winds up flying into basically a nitroglycerin plant and his robot blows up. And Glorft flies off in an escape pod, pointing out that that they haven't seen the last of him, and they will eventually get the Megas unit back. But Coop then stops him, pointing out that that's what they always say, and proceeds away from it on the way out. And in any case, with the Glorft now dealt with, Megas is then returned to the car show, and while they're having a couple of casualties and there have been a couple of cars destroyed, they do wind up having enough cars left over, still standing to actually vote. And of course, Tiny and Coop Tiny, Jamie, and Coop and Goat are all standing on the podium and are awaiting the judgment. And what we find out is that through unanimous decision, Kiva is the one who actually winds up winning the prize. And when Kiva winds up being very confused, pointing out that she didn't enter a car and also isn't a car person, Tiny points out that there's a very good reason for that, pointing out that that even though she isn't a car person, her having seen her fix the CPU unit, they point out that her technical knowledge is well and away above several of the other guys at the car show, and point out that of course that makes it more than worthy to actually accept the prize. And of course she does that, and at Jamie's prodding, she does wind up giving a speech, even though humorously, because she doesn't know cars very well, she winds up giving a speech about how she spent her whole life designing giant robots and upgrading them for firepower, and of course winds up giving this whole speech about how she basically makes giant robots with a lot of firepower, and it is rather funny, but it also makes sense. Kiva's not a car person; she didn't enter a car, so and that's the closest thing she knows to that sort of knowledge. So of course that's the thing she brings up in her speech. But in any case, with that, Coop and Tiny then realize that they never actually finished their competition, and decide to continue the competition to see who has the best ride. And of course, because Coop Megas isn't fully functioning yet, he quickly realizes that he needs to reassemble the wires to actually put them together and get the car running and get Megas running. But of course, Kiva stops him mid-speech when she realizes what Coop is doing, and tells him that she hadn't fully fixed the engine yet, and tells him that Megas is still very much unstable. And sure enough, she winds up being right, because Megas winds up smashing several of the cars, and to the point where it actually winds up causing a car fire. And Coop apologizes, but also points out that they could possibly salvage the cars until the cars wind up exploding. And realizing he has nothing else to lose, then offers to buy everybody else popcorn chicken. And that's ultimately where the episode ends, with a pullout of the giant car fire at the car show. And then the episode ends with all of the extended cast using the DDR machine and just kind of trying to rack up the highest score while playing inside of Megas using its manual mode. So yeah, rather funny, rather humorous. I did wind up enjoying this episode. So, yeah, first and foremost, it makes perfect sense I've mentioned this, but it makes perfect sense for Megas to be able to be eligible for a car show, since it technically is a giant robot car. I mean, according to the song, it is indeed a giant robot car. So that means it's perfectly eligible for car shows, even though the guys judging it don't fully understand if it is eligible or not, until Coop points out that it probably is in the custom category. And of course, it's just rather humorous where Coop for the first half of the episode, Coop is just partaking in car show shenanigans using a giant robot. It makes sense in your brain that that's exactly the kind of thing that Coop would be able to do with Megas, and it works. And then of course, and then for the latter half of the episode, the Glorft show up to be antagonists. But for the most part, this episode is just about Coop going through car show shenanigans and then fighting off the Glorft at one point. But yeah, it is a very fun episode, and the giant robots don't really wind up being a thing until like the very end, when they finally get Megas working enough that Coop is able to actually fight back against the Glorft. But yeah, it's just a very humorous episode, and I did enjoy it. But in any case, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out, and you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Be sure to check those out. Links down in the description. I don't know what I said there, but and finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. What's about me is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me, and I think specifically for Vegas month, I actually have it queued up to be Courage month. So yeah, go check that out. Link is on the end screen. Go check out the previous one of these that I did. But for the time being, yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, I will see you guys the next video. Peace!